Hello. So as you just saw, the name of my class is Awakening Wisdom and Compassion. It's based on Mahayana Buddhism. And I chose the word awakening deliberately because according to Buddhist teaching, compassion and wisdom are not qualities that we have to acquire or even necessarily develop, but they're present within us full blown. And that's true all the time, but we don't always experience it that way. We do have moments when we feel that. Typically, it's when we're experiencing some kind of intense emotion. Someone that we care about is maybe getting married or having a baby or possibly dying, and we feel very intensely, but we're focused, our attention is outward on others, not on ourselves. And we experience pure wisdom and compassion without any kind of filter. But in our day-to-day lives, oftentimes we would like to feel, maybe it sounds too grandiose to say wise and compassionate, but at least kind and insightful about what's going on, and we don't feel that way at all. So in Tibetan Buddhism, they have a very practical approach to learning how to access our own innate qualities of wisdom and compassion. It's known as Lojong, which translates as mind training. Lo is one of many words for mind, and Zhong just means training. And so that's what we're going to be doing in this class. I'm going to be teaching meditation, and we'll be meditating in every class session as part of that mind training. We'll also be contemplating certain topics, and we'll be studying slogans, which were developed about 1,000 years ago by a Buddhist teacher who came to Tibet from India. We're going to be working with a book, here it is, called The Practice of Lojong. It's by a Buddhist teacher, Tralhag Kyabgon. And so that's our text that we're going to be, we won't be reading the whole thing, but I'll be assigning readings that are recommended for each of the classes. And so one way that you could find out more about the class before it begins, if you like, is you can go to Amazon and order a sample of the book to read, or you could order the book if you find it interesting enough. And hopefully that will get you further interested. So that's really what I wanted to say. And thank you very much for taking the time to view this. And I hope to meet you in March.
Hello, my name is Dylan Mahoney. I'm a professor at the University of South Florida, although I'm originally from Goffstown, New Hampshire. And I have been a professor of anthropology now for over 12 years. Most of my background is in East Africa, working on environmental reconstruction and indigenous politics, as well as art and globalization. And more recently, over the last couple of years, when not working with Swahili-speaking refugees, I have been focused on some projects here in New Hampshire that go back to my interests in the 1990s. And so I'll be teaching an OLLI course about Trails to Indigenous New Hampshire that gives some basic framework and background, sort of methodological approach to how people in New Hampshire might approach many of the long historical and deep complexities of our Indigenous past and history. And I'll be bringing a lot of my background from anthropology, how we approach Indigenous as biological and cultural, things that are always changing and always politicized. And so I'll be able to compare and bring in some examples. Mostly I do work in East Africa, but coming from New Hampshire, this is an exciting opportunity to return to some very important issues around the Indigenous history of the area west of the Merrimack. And I'm actually very excited to talk a little bit about some of my recent research, but also more so to talk to a popular audience about how we can collaboratively, as community members and as academics work together to revise and revitalize some of this history. So I look forward to meeting any of you, and Happy New Year.
Hi, I'm Carol Gardner, and I hope you'll join our talk and discussion about some New England colonists we don't often hear about. And those are the ones who came to New England by force. We'll start our class with a slideshow, and the slideshow tells the story of 422 Scottish prisoners of war who were brought to New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Maine against their wills in 1650 and 1651. We'll learn about the conditions they faced as soldiers, prisoners, indentured servants, and finally, free individuals, and about how they adapted in a strange new land after being forced to emigrate 3,000 miles from their homes and their families. And we'll also talk about some historical trends, including the displacement of large groups of people at the time, English, Scottish, African, and Native American peoples. This was the very beginning of the modern age, and it was a period of rapid change and upheaval, a lot like what we're experiencing now. So I think you'll find some interesting parallels. Now, after the slideshow, we'll engage in a discussion about these topics, and we'll talk about how 400 not so famous immigrants helped to shape modern day New England. If you like history and you'd like to learn more about life in the very early years of European settlement in New England, I invite you to log on and join the discussion. If you'd like to read up on the topic beforehand, please take a look at my book here on the left, The Involuntary American, A Scottish Prisoner's Journey to the New World. I hope to see you on March 4th, and I hope you bring your questions, your knowledge, and your curiosity. Thanks.
Ann Farron. I am a retired fifth grade teacher in Manchester, and my husband and I enjoy traveling. We've been to all 50 states and all of the sites in the national park system. Travel with me along the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail from St. Charles, Missouri to the Pacific Coast. My husband and I followed this trail last summer, camping along the route that the Corps of Discovery followed from 1804 to 1806. Imagine setting off on a trip without a map, hoping to find a Northwest Passage to the Pacific Ocean. Imagine how you would deal with communicating with Native Americans who know the area and could help you if you could understand each other. I will show slides of Fort Mandan, where they spent the winter of 1804 to 1805, and Fort Clatsop, where they wintered from 1805 to 1806. I will show some of the Native American villages which they visited and where Sacagawea joined the Corps. You will see some of the places which caused them the most difficulty. The 5 massive falls at Great Falls, Montana, where they spent a month portaging boats and supplies. The Bitterroot Mountains, where they hiked through snow and bitter cold with 60 horses. And Decision Point, where they camped for 5 days as they tried to decide which of 2 rivers was the one that would lead them to the Pacific Ocean. I will share slides of the places we saw, which have been proven to be the exact spots where the explorers camped, such as Travelers Rest, Montana, landmarks they used for navigation, such as Hat Rock, sites which have been reconstructed, such as the salt cairns, where 3 men boiled seawater to extract 20 gallons of salt for flavoring food and for food preservation for their return trip. I look forward to sharing details of our trip and what we learned about the Lewis and Clark expedition. I hope you will join me.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. This is Kelly Dwyer with Nature Education Opportunities, and I would like to just give you a little preview of this program that I'll be presenting on Zoom. It's the romantic behavior of animals. It's the fascinating world of animal courtship. So early spring in New Hampshire brings a cacophony of sounds in the woods, fields, and the ponds as a multitude of animals begin fascinating courtship rituals. In this presentation, using pictures and audio recordings, we will discuss the natural history and courtship behaviors of many of our beloved wild animals. Beginning with the avian world, you'll learn how those owls, those females that are incubating eggs in sub-zero temperatures, survive and their eggs will thrive and hatch out into new little owlets. Then we move on to the songbird strategies for reproductive success, including territory establishment, their songs, and other bizarre rituals like the woodcock sky dance at sunset. In the world of mammal courtship, on the other hand, has some really intriguing behaviors and rituals and sounds that naturalist Mary Holland best sums up, and I quote, "There is a reason why March is one of the noisiest months of the year, and it has everything to do with hormones. Many animals are now at the peak of their breeding season, and loud vocalizations are part of this courtship ritual. So for anyone who has woken from a sound sleep wondering which neighbor was being killed outside their window, this should be reassuring. Much more than screams, however, are involved in attracting a four-footed mate. Fights, bites, and punches are also an integral part of March's courtship rituals," end quote. So after learning about all of these amazing sounds in the dark, you may be tempted to just throw an extra blanket on your bed and sleep with the window cracked, and you'll appreciate all of these sounds in a whole new way. So we will end this presentation with the amphibian world. Those are the animals that most of us associate with the beginning of spring, like the sleigh bell call of the spring peeper, which heralds the changing seasons ahead. So I invite you to close your eyes right now and maybe just listen to this little recording of the spring peeper, and it will evoke those really wonderful moist nights in March. I look forward to that, as I know that we're getting more daylight and we're finally entering a new season of spring. So I invite you to join me on March 3rd via Zoom as we delve into the ancient rituals of these three major animal groups and their courtship as they begin a new season of reproductive success. And I promise you will look at spring in an entirely different manner. So be well, be safe, and I hope to see you in March.
I'm Doug Brooks. I will be teaching a course in the spring called Consequential Decisions, focusing on three key decisions from the US Supreme Court over the past 60 years. And I've discovered since I sent the course description, and this is the perfect thing because we have three major subject areas in the course historically here. And one of them is very relevant to the current term of the Supreme Court. And there are really two other cases that are very interesting because they both involve significant, potentially significant expansions of individual rights, which all these cases are involved with. So I'm a career journalist and I've taken to book writing as well. I'm currently engaged in research on a US Supreme Court Chief Justice from the 19th and early 20th century that's proving to be fascinating. So I'm really into this subject matter, and I hope that people will enjoy the course as well as we learn together about how courts are political. There is no question in the world that the US Supreme Court is a political body as well as the judicial one, but what the important differences are and why a Supreme Court decision is not like winning an election. It can't be, it shouldn't be, and whatever happens next year will be different perhaps than we expect because we're too primed to see courts in a political role, I believe. So the three decisions that we're going to look at in the course, well, there's actually four, but three themes. The first is probably the most famous, Brown versus Board of Education. It was a decision in which the Supreme Court essentially overruled itself. 60 years earlier in Plessy versus Ferguson, the court said that we could have separate institutions based on race as long as they were equal. By 60 years later, it was pretty obvious that those separate institutions were never going to be equal, and the court crafted a new course. But as we'll point out in that section of it, it hasn't been entirely smooth sailing for what we used to call school desegregation as well. The second theme is voting rights. Again, very relevant to the present. Two decisions there. One is called Baker and the other one Reynolds. Collectively, what they did was they forced the reapportionment of all state legislatures as they then existed, because they were not based on population. We think that's incredible today, but senates, particularly state senates, were not based on population. They tended to be based on counties. And everybody knows that Maine has some very tiny counties and some very large counties. So it wasn't a very, quote, democratic system. It wasn't based on one person, one vote, which is the principle laid down here. And that one has stood the test of time. I don't think anyone really questions that. The third decision, of course, is very much in question. It is Roe v. Wade establishing the right to abortion in all 50 states in a very sweeping way. And as I won't give away the course material, but the sweeping nature of Roe is one of the things that has been troubling ever since. You know, there really hasn't been much room for any restrictions on abortion at all at any level. And that has built up over time a very considerable momentum to do something about that decision. And of course, at least half the country thinks that's going to be a terrible thing if the court does something major. Many other people think it's time. So these are the consequential decisions of our time. And I would just mention that in addition to Roe, there's two fascinating individual rights cases, which the court is also going to be deciding. One is about whether the individual right to firearms, which was only established in 2010, it's a very recent individual right, will be expanded further by this court. And the other one is a Maine case. Interestingly enough, it's called, let me get the title. It's called Carson versus Makin. Makin is the current education commissioner of Maine, so she is the defendant in that case. And essentially, it's questioning whether the public school choice program that is present in many rural parts of Maine, where parents can send their kid to any of a list of schools, should include religious schools. Up to this point, no religious schools have been eligible. There is a certain segment of the legal community that believes that this court will require such a choice program to include religious schools. So, you know, we're right up to date there. There's a lot of fascinating stuff going on with the court. And I don't know how much we'll be able to discuss in 3 sessions of the course, but I am looking forward to it. And I hope you will join us. Thank you.
Hi, Ollie friends. I'm Betsy Holmes, and this semester I'm teaching a class called Russian Art from the Slavs to the Soviets. In this 3-week, 2-hour class, I'll be teaching, those things that you generally think of when you think of Russian art, the icons, the architecture, Soviet influences, but we also will take the time to learn about some of the stuff you don't necessarily know about, some of the more diverse populations on that huge country that we know today as Russia. I've had really good luck using Zoom with my classes. And so for this class, or for this presentation, I thought I'd just show you a couple slides so you could get a feel for what it will look like. All right, in week 1, we're going to start with the prehistory of Russia and get to know the Rus and the Slavs and some of their earliest artifacts. Then for much of the class, we're going to consider when Christianity is taken by Vladimir I, and then it creates this huge production of icons. We'll look at the iconography and the process to make them, as well as other Byzantine influences. In week 2, we're going to fast forward and take a look at the history that brings us Peter the Great, and then a while later, Catherine the Great. The capital of Russia moves to St. Petersburg, and we'll see how many Western influences really changed the culture and the art of Russia. Also in week 2 is when we will take a look at the various ethnic and diverse population which at one time or another have been within the borders of Russia, including Jewish populations, tribal peoples down in the southern areas of Georgia and Azerbaijan, as well as the indigenous peoples in Siberia. Week 3, we're going to see huge shifts in the politics and as a result of the art, going from very conservative to very avant-garde. Once the Soviets are established, we'll take a good look at the socialist realism in art and how the government is really establishing not only what the content of the art is, but right down to how it's made and who can make it. Not everyone conforms to this art, of course, and so we'll also take a look at artists' work that are considered nonconformist. Now, these classes that we have tend to have pretty lively discussion, and unfortunately, I'm not a scholar of Russian art, so if I find there is a question I can't answer, I usually send out a lengthy email after each class with answers, with additional information and some videos. There is no required reading for the class, but I do think this helps, and lots of times students can share interesting things themselves. So if you have an interest in Russian history, in Russian art, or if you just need something to do this March, I hope you'll join us for the class. See you there.
Hello, potential OLLI students for my class called How to Read and Enjoy Poetry. I'm Megan Cronin. I'm a professor at St. Anselm College. I've taught at OLLI several times before, and I always enjoy it. The class is a two-part class. We'll meet twice in March, and I believe both visits will be via Zoom. And we are also going to be doing two things in class. As the title suggests, we'll be learning how to read poetry a little bit better and how to enjoy the poetry that we read. To do that, we're going to talk about some techniques for good reading of poetry, how to bring our experience of feeling and understanding the poetry out of the poem's language and form, and to talk about how the form and the language of the poem advance and increase our experience of it in an enjoyable way. We'll have some techniques for analyzing poetry with some terminology that allows us to talk about poetry. I'll provide 6 to 8 poems for each class. We'll probably talk about 3 or 4 in depth for each class. And then for the second class, I'll have you bring some of your favorite poems and we'll talk about those. And maybe we'll use some of our techniques of reading on bringing some added enjoyment to our sharing and understanding of those poems. So I hope you had a great winter holiday, a Christmas or a Hanukkah, and I wish you a happy new year. I look forward to seeing you in March. Thank you so much.
Welcome. My name is Rick Weinstein, and I've been playing bridge since the early 90s and teaching it since about 2007, and have had the privilege of teaching for OLLI since 2015. And those who have been in class know that we've been covering the basics the last several times. We've been talking about how to bid a hand, how to play a hand, and very importantly, how to defend a hand. And we're going to be taking a leap this spring into what are known as some of the more commonly used and useful conventions in the game to make your game better. And we're going to be looking first at the Stayman Convention in detail, and then at Jacobi transfer bids in detail. And then in the last couple of weeks, we'll be looking at major suit openers and responses, and some particular techniques that you can use to find the best contract. I'm reminded of the joke of the person who has had a bad game and says, well, we had a partnership misunderstanding. I assumed my partner knew what he was doing. Well, that can be the feeling you have when you're working at cross purposes. And hopefully with the help of this course, some of the more intricate situations can be handled in such a way that you and your partner are both in tune and in sync with what's going on. And that's what makes the game fun. So we're going to be doing 4 Saturday mornings in March and April, I believe, with a break for the Easter weekend. And we hope that you can join us at that time. Thanks.
My name is Nancy Sandberg, and I invite you to consider signing up for Small Town Big Oil, a modern David and Goliath tale that continues to inspire those who care about self-determination and environmental protection. It is based on the book Small Town Big Oil by David Moore. It tells the very improbable story of 3 New Hampshire women who stand up to Aristotle Onassis and his plan to build the world's largest oil refinery in the university town of Durham. You will meet the author, David Moore, who will set the stage as the story unfolds during the nationwide energy crisis of 1973. He will introduce you to the 3 women, each of whom in their own way confront the powerful forces allied against their small town. The force of the state's most influential newspaper editor, William Loeb, the power of the ultra-conservative governor, Meldrum Thompson, and the pressure of the federal government to end the energy crisis with its long lines at gas stations and people's fears of freezing in their homes in the dark. First, you will meet me, Nancy Sandberg, a young farm wife who suddenly finds herself the head of a growing grassroots citizens group, Save Our Shores, fighting a massive heavy industry that will totally change her small town and the Great Bay Estuary. You will learn how Save Our Shores organized to fight Olympic refineries by informing the local community and legislators about the negative impacts of oil on health, the environment, and the state's economy. Next, David Moore will tell you about the late Phyllis Bennett, owner of Public Occurrences, a startup weekly newspaper that exposes what is behind the deceptive land dealings in Durham. Imagine the shock when citizens learn it's a 400,000 barrel per day refinery, pipeline, and supertanker port at the Isles of Shoals. Phyllis Bennett commits her newspaper to expose the facts about the impacts of oil so townspeople can make an informed decision at town meeting. Lastly, you will meet Dudley Dudley, a young, newly elected representative of Durham in the New Hampshire legislature, leading the effort to allow Durham to determine its own future with a home rule bill to thwart the efforts of the governor and his men to override the town. I think you will want to sign up for this course to find out how the story ends.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily Preston, and I will be teaching a class called Investing in Joy, Enhancing Your Home with Art and Craft. This is a class designed for us to sit around and talk about art, which I love to talk about art. Love to talk about the artists that I've met, how I have bought pieces that really have made my home really homey, make it feel more like me. It's not about spending a lot of money. It's about finding things that bring you joy. And it's not about, the Picassos, the Matisse and such like that. It's about the local artists that you meet. Maybe it's an artist at a craft fair. Maybe it's a street vendor on one of your vacations you take somewhere. There are lots of just fun ways to find art. So we're going to explore different ways that you can search for art, online as well as out in the world, ways you can think about it, things to look for. It's just a fun way to enhance your life. And so I want to share my joy of art with you. So I hope that you will sign up. It's on April 1st.
Hi, my name is Diana Robinson, and I am a dietitian from Hannaford Supermarkets. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the presentation that I'm going to be doing for OLLI this coming spring. The title's Good Food, Good Mood, Living Your Best Life. And it's going to be on Monday, April 4th, 2022 at 10:30 in the morning. And some of the topics that we're going to talk about for the Good Food, Good Mood class is, what does the science say about the link between specific foods and our moods? And then I'm also going to discuss food choices and how your body and mind feel. This has been especially pertinent in the past few years when many of us have turned to food for comfort. So hopefully this topic is top of mind for you on how what we choose for food can make us feel. I'm going to touch on eating mindfully, which has to do with what, where, how much, and how often we eat, and how that might help us in our pursuit of physical and mental well-being. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about daily habits that we have that might also affect our mood, such as, do we have breakfast, snacks, the timing of our meals, whether we are hydrated, and then also whether or not you drink alcohol. So I hope to see you in April for my Good Food, Good Mood class. In the meantime, be well. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eleanor Strang, and with me is Mike Baker, and he'll be talking after me. We are here to talk about a course we're presenting together called Hawthorne with a W. It's a 2-session course, and in the first session, we'll be looking at Hawthorne's life and times. He was a very complicated man. He was embarrassed and appalled by the cruelty of his Puritan ancestors. And in fact, he changed the spelling of his last name from Hathorne to Hawthorne with a W, at least in part, probably to distance himself from those Puritan ancestors. And yet, he was himself obsessed with Puritan ideas of guilt and sin, which greatly influenced his writing. In fact, you could probably call him an anti-Puritan Puritan. He was also a very shy man and often reclusive. And yet, he developed relationships with some of the most famous people of his time. He lived for a while, a few years, in Concord, Massachusetts, and became part of the circle of transcendentalists and abolitionists that included Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. He himself, however, was neither a transcendentalist nor an abolitionist. He lived for a while in the Berkshires, became friendly with Herman Melville, who then proceeded to dedicate Moby Dick to him. And he was a loyal, lifelong friend of Franklin Pierce, who, as you know, became a very controversial president of the United States. So in the first session of this course, we'll look at this enigmatic man, try to understand this anti-Puritan Puritan, this shy man who somehow ended up in the midst of the political and intellectual currents of mid-19th century America. And now to talk about the second session of our course is Mike Baker.
Thank you, Eleanor. This course really goes back almost 2 years now. Eleanor and I were in conversation one day about what kind of courses we were thinking of presenting for Ollie. And she mentioned that she was doing all kinds of research on those conquered intellectuals, Emerson and Thoreau and Hawthorne, the Bronsons, the whole transcendental movement and all of that. And I found that fascinating to begin with. But a conversation several weeks later said, "No, I've scrapped that," said Eleanor. I've become so fascinated with Hawthorne that I think I want to spend the time doing just centering the course around him. Well, I've always wanted to do something with Hawthorne, and so I asked her, "Can I piggyback with you?" And graciously, she said yes. With the rich background that she's going to provide for us about the man and the times and the movements that were taking place at that particular time during Hawthorne's very vibrant career, I thought it was a perfect time for us to take a look at some of his writings, particularly the short stories, since they fit into the format so nicely for an Ollie course. We'll look at several of his stories of, and to see his interest, particularly, as Eleanor said, his obsession with his Puritan past and puritanical past, his interest in science, and yet his skepticism of science and how that influence and trickles into his writing as well. He's not read as much now today. He's categorized as a dark romantic. But I think that's unfortunate because he certainly segues, for my taste anyway, into what we would call modern realism. And I think that it's a shame that we're not reading more of Hawthorne today, except on the college level or things like that. I'll send you short stories. I'll send you several. And we'll discuss those stories, talking about some of the things that Eleanor has already alluded to in her introduction. I hope that you're going to join us. I think we'll explore both the man, his times, and his writings of really a very interesting American, Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Hi, Ollie participants, meteorologist Serena Arnold here. And one of my big passions, as everyone I think has heard, is I love to explain the weather to anybody in ways that people can understand it. And so for this Ollie course, I'm doing something totally different that I've never done before. There's no syllabus, there's no topic, there's no expectations. It's ask me anything. It's come bring those weather questions and let's see where the conversation takes us. Let's see who kicks off with a question and where it goes. For example, we do not have much snow on the ground right now, but we have had more than our fair share of freezing rain. How does freezing rain occur? How does that happen? Taking a look at the little bit amount of snow that we do have, it's a very wet and heavy snow that's on the ground right now. If you were to melt about 6 inches of this, it would equal about 1 inch of water. It's a 1:6 ratio, where really dry, fluffy snow is more like a 1:10 or 1:12 ratio, where you need 10 or 12 inches of that to melt down to equal 1 inch of water. How does that affect a forecast? How do you know what ratio is going to fall? And you need to know that because your forecast for snowfall could be way off if you're expecting a light, fluffy snow and you end up getting this wet, heavy stuff. So come talk to me about the weather. Let's have some fun and see where the conversation takes us. I hope you join me at my very first Ask Me Anything course.
Hi, I'm Jim Isaac, and I think we've had enough bad news for the last couple of years, maybe, and causing a little stress. So perhaps we should look at the other side of the coin, because things are actually better than you might think. Therefore, we have a class called Things Are Better Than You Think. It's based on the book you see this behind me called Factfulness by Hans Rosling. Hans is a medical expert who's worked worldwide in terms of dealing with a variety of issues like poverty and disease out of Sweden, and has done a very large number of TED Talks, is one of the most popular speakers. And I think you will find it delightful to both take a look at some of the issues that no doubt you have developed some understanding of that might not quite be correct, because after all, things are better than you think. And then we'll also look at Hans's analysis of why people end up with some wrong understandings of the actual data and facts about the world. So I look forward to enjoying this class with you. We'll have 2 sessions. The first one will be dealing basically with a number of issues that people typically have acquired some misperceptions about, we'll put it that way, and what the actual data shows. And then the second class will actually look at the reasons that Hans has identified, why we end up with these misperceptions about how the world actually is working at this point. So, like I say, it's time for some good news, and I think we'll all enjoy reviewing some of the good news about the world and the data that Hans brings to light. So I look forward to joining you this spring for this class.
Hi, this is John Russell Andover. A couple of years ago, my wife gave me a book called Immortal Poems, and this is the inspiration for my course last spring on immortal poems. In looking at the book, there are over 150 different poets whose works are printed, but only 8 of those are women. I found this very surprising because 2 of my favorite poets are Emily Dickinson and Mary Oliver. I decided, therefore, we needed a course on women poets. And in my research, I have found great women poets ranging from the 1700s to the 21st century. So please join me on Wednesday, April 13th, as we celebrate National Poets Month and explore some great women poets on Zoom. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nancy Williams. I'm a director of Waterville Community Land Trust, a community land trust in Waterville, Maine. And we're going to talk about how our little community land trust has been working to bring change to a declining neighborhood. Let's get started. But don't forget, neighborhoods are not just the streets, houses, lights, sidewalks, and those sort of things. They're people. It's the residents who make the neighborhoods. In order to bring about change, we have to work with our residents. Our social services provide some basic things that people need. It's helped bring a lot of people out of dire poverty. But can we envision a world where we no longer have generations of, just making it families? Rather than income, shouldn't we be creating generational wealth? Wealth is more than a place to live or a job. It's security. It's a better future and a gift to the next generation. In declining neighborhoods, we're often working to provide wealth-building resources to families in the 2nd to 4th quintiles. There's a growing affordability gap from what people can afford to pay for either a home ownership or a rental. So we're going to talk about examining ways to revitalize neighborhoods and provide for affordable homes with an emphasis on wealth-building home ownership. We'll talk about neighborhood decline. What are the signs? How to revitalize neighborhoods. How can you inspire pride of place and community spirit? We're going to build family wealth, focus on affordable home ownership with single-family homes and duplexes, co-ops, and condos, and give you examples of renovations and restorations and rebuilding. We're going to retain the historic fabric of the community. We want to turn around decaying neighborhood. We're going to do what we talk about is develop your PPOs. So there's a lot to do, and I'm really looking forward to a vigorous discussion with you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Paul H. Carr, and I'd like to tell you about my new OLI course. So let me do a screen share so you can see my slides that I'll be showing you, my PowerPoint talk. Here it is. And my course is called COVID's Impacts, Near-Death Experiences, and Eternal Life. Now, one of the major impact of COVID is 800,000 deaths in the United States. This raises the issue of eternal life after our present life. We'll be talking about this book by Dr. Raymond Moody. And toward the end, we'll be talking about deepening our understanding of eternal life using some of the thoughts of theologian Paul Tillich and others. Here's a chart showing you the 800,000 deaths, COVID deaths here, much greater than the 291,000 people who died in World War II. 8,000 COVID deaths, greater than World War II, significantly greater. And this raises the issues. Are near-death experiences evidence of eternal life or life after death? Well, let's have a look at this interview, Lulu's interview of Dr. Raymond Moody. Here's a photo I took of the interview. He's the author of Life After Life, or you might call it Eternal Life After This Life, a best-selling book, sold 13,000 copies. Investigation that revealed the reality of near-death experiences. And there's also a foreword by Dr. Eben Alexander, who had a near-death experience. He was a neurosurgeon and wrote Proof of Heaven. He felt that near-death experiences are proof of heaven. Dr. Moody coined the term NDE, or near-death experience, and concludes that they are visits to another dimension of reality. Visits to another dimension of reality. Originally a skeptic about this, he is convinced that they are real after 50 years of research. So let's deepen our understandings of eternal life. Theologian Paul Tillich understands eternal life as follows. Our lives are limited in the horizontal dimension of time, but we are fulfilled in the transcendent vertical dimension of eternity. He's building on some of the thought of St. Francis, who lived in the 1200s. He said, in dying, we are born to eternal life. So in summary, I'd like to have you join us, COVID's impacts, near-death experiences, and eternal life. I've been teaching OLI courses since 2007, but in my former life, I was a branch chief at the Air Force Research Lab, and we developed the surface acoustic wave components now used in cell phones and radar. After my retirement, the Templeton Foundation awarded me some grants for the science and religion courses that I taught at UMass Lowell. So love to have you join us.
Hello, I am Glenn Myers, and I'm previewing my course, Ranked Choice Voting the Australian Way. First of all, what is ranked choice voting? It's the system where the voter fills out a ballot ranking the candidate, with a vote being the top ranked candidate. A candidate with the least number of votes is eliminated. The votes for the eliminated candidate are transferred to the next ranked candidate on the ballot, and we continue the process until a candidate receives 50% of the vote. There are versions of ranked choice voting that are applicable to multi-winner elections, and we'll get into that. Ranked choice voting is becoming more and more popular in the United States. Most recently, it was used in New York City for their municipal elections, and they received a lot of publicity for that. I'll also call out Cambridge, Massachusetts, where they have been electing their 9-member city council by ranked choice voting since the 1940s. There are many others. Why focus on Australia? Well, The ranked choice voting has been used in Australia since 1918, and they have a very unique electoral system. In their House of Representatives, they elect one seat in each district, and in their Senate, they elect 6 seats in each state. They also have mandatory voting. Now, Australia, since they've been doing it for a long time, they have a strong party influence that has not yet evolved in the United States use of ranked choice voting. One of the more fascinating aspects of their system is that if the House passes a bill and the Senate does not, they declare new elections. Think about that one. It puts a lot of pressure on the House and Senate to agree. Now, each of the Australian states can set their own rules, and they've been doing a lot of experimenting on versions of ranked choice voting, and they have learned a lot from it. So how well does ranked choice voting work in Australia? Well, given its long history and experimentation, we ask the questions, how has ranked choice voting evolved over time? And also, how do the political parties work the system? We look at surveys of voter and candidate satisfaction, and we discuss its relevance here in the United States. In my investigations of ranked choice voting, I have found the Australian system to be very fascinating, and I hope you will join me on April 25th.
Hello, my name is Lou Yalgin, and I'm a child of Holocaust survivors. My parents survived the Nazis as members of a partisan resistance group in Lithuania. This coming spring, I'll be teaching a class for Ollie on Jewish resistance during the Holocaust. We'll use my parents' survival story and the film Defiance, starring Daniel Craig, as background. The goals of the class are to become familiar with the history of Jewish partisans, to engage in discussion about the complex ethical issues partisans face, to differentiate between authority and leadership, to discover the underlying Jewish values that influence the actions of partisans, and explore primary sources and relate them to modern historical and personal issues. I look forward to seeing you in my class on Jewish resistance during the Holocaust. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tessa McDonald, and I will be facilitating Great Decisions Part 1 this spring for Ollie. Let me tell you a little bit about the Great Decisions program. It is sponsored by the Foreign Policy Association. Each year they research and compile information about topics of great interest to the United States foreign policy and our relationships with other countries across the world. These topics are written by politicians, researchers, diplomats, and those involved in foreign relations. You don't need to know very much about the topics to really get a lot out of this course. Participants in the past have said they have gained a greater appreciation. They read the news differently. They listen to the news with a greater perspective. Let me tell you a little bit about the topics that we'll be covering this spring. The Great Decisions 2022 edition has a rocket launch on the cover, and it shows the topics that are researched in this particular edition. They have added a bonus topic, changing demographics, this year, so we'll work that in to our discussions. In the spring, we will be covering outer space, climate change, Russia and the U.S., and Myanmar and ASEAN. In the fall, we will have Great Decisions Part 2, and we will read about the other topics. The way the course is organized is that you will purchase the book ahead of time, either through the Foreign Policy Association or your favorite ebook vendor. Read one of the chapters before each course, each class. And then we will view a 30-minute video that really gets in depth about the topic, and they're fascinating interviews with people involved. Then the rest of the class will be discussion, and it's self-moderated. People answer questions, raise questions, give their own opinions about things, and challenge. It's very interactive, and again, you do not need to have prior knowledge about these topics to get truly engaged with learning more. I have been involved with OLLI since 2009 when I joined as a member. Then I became very interested in presenting and have done so for many years. Currently, I am also a part-time staff member at OLLI. I support the Mount Washington Valley region and the Seacoast region, and I truly enjoy working with the volunteers. So I welcome you to sign up for the spring's version of Great Decisions Part 1.
Hi, my name is Monica Cataldo, and this spring I'll be presenting the class Quilts, Coverlets, and Rugs, How We Have Covered Our Beds. Many of us have a cherished quilt or coverlet, or we have admired ones we've seen in shops, museums, or books. Who made these treasured textiles, and how and where were they made? In this course, you'll learn about the bed coverings of Europe and North America through World War II. I'm an amateur quilter and weaver, but I love history and research. In learning about the history of woven coverlets and sewn quilts, I came to realize how much of their patterns and materials were tied to historical events and economics. If you haven't seen it yet, the Museum of Fine Arts has a wonderful quilt and coverlet exhibit titled Fabric of the Nation, which runs through January 17th. Have you ever been to the New England Quilt Museum in Lowell? During our class, I'll cover some of the styles of bed coverings shown in each of these exhibits and even more. Did you know that quilting has been around for more than 5,000 years? The earliest use of quilting was in clothing. Quilted bed coverings weren't created until around the 12th century. Although the main focus will be bed coverings in America, we'll also discuss their precursors in Europe as well. So much of what was done in Europe influenced quilting and weaving in America. How did the quilts in Wales influence Amish quilts? How did quilt patterns get their names? Did you know that most coverlets were woven by men? How did the Industrial Revolution affect the creation of these bed coverings? Besides quilts and coverlets, we'll touch on bed rugs. These are really their own category, and they were created in several countries. Besides the patterns of these various bed coverings, we'll learn about the materials that were used and how they evolved depending on their historical and economic circumstances. The first 2-hour class will explore woven coverlets and bed rugs, and the second will focus on sewn quilts. Please be aware that this is a history class, not a how-to course. If you have an old coverlet, bed rug, quilt at home, I'd love to have you bring it to the class to share. I hope you'll join me in this class so I can share my excitement about these sleeping beauties and entice you to explore even more. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Baker, and I'll be offering a course which is an extension of a former course. Let me ask a question first, though. Who doesn't like a story? I mean, after all, from the oral tradition where stories were passed from one person to the next and one generation on to the next, to what you and I experienced in Once Upon a Time. Well, who doesn't like a story then? We did as kids and we do love them now, whether it's on television or whether it's a book that we're reading or what have you. And so a few years ago, I offered a course called the American Short Story, which was sort of an evolution of the short story through time, from the earliest of people like Washington Irving or Mark Twain or what have you, right up to the present day. And I used an A list of authors in that. When I say Twain to Hemingway to present day authors, they were all from the A list. But after I finished that course, I said to myself, gosh, you know, there's a lot of great stories by authors who are not necessarily household names. We look at writers like Shirley Jackson, who gave us The Lottery, or Ring Lardner, who gave us Haircut. Those are classics, and yet those are not household names. So I created a course at that time called Major Writers, Minor Writers, Major Stories. And we looked at a whole bunch of writings that were really, really classical works. But again, we're not from writers who were not so common to us. And so what I'm doing in this course, this is going to be minor writers, major stories 2, or more minor writers, major stories, whatever. We'll spend 4 classes together looking at some writers who, again, may not be as familiar to us, but have written some classic works. We'll try to explore some of those, and I invite you to join us at that particular time, that we'll be able to see some really good writing going along.
Do agents and publishers shrug off the story that only you can tell? Do they say it's well written, but, and you know you have an audience? Consider self-publishing. Hi, I'm Gail Schilling, and I'm inviting you to my class, Self-Publishing, Process, Pitfalls, and Payoff. I'll share my experiences on this arduous road to self-expression. You know, I wrote Do Not Go Gentle, Go to Paris, Travels of an Uncertain Woman of a Certain Age in less than a year. I spent the next 7 years trying to get it published. But when a friend finally said, Gail, hurry up and publish that so I can buy it for Christmas presents, I took the plunge. I decided to publish it myself. 6 months later, I have the book. That was 2019. I've now sold 5,000 copies and generated 400 reviews on Amazon. And you know what? You can too. First, you need to learn the basics and save maybe 5 or 6 years. In my interactive class, we'll learn about traditional publishing. We'll learn about options for self-publishing. You'll determine your own purpose and goals in your writing audience. You'll explore professional helps available along the way. You'll consider book design. That includes your cover, your format, and also audiobooks. We'll probe what makes an engaging title. This is really important for search engine optimization, or SEO. If you don't know what that is, you'll find out. We'll discuss permissions and other legalities, including ISBN and Library of Congress numbers. We'll ponder marketing strategies and ways to get your book out in the public so that it will be sold. And we'll ask lots of questions. So please join me and take an honest look at self-publishing, the ultimate do-it-yourself project.
Hi, OLLI participants. We are going to talk about a class that I am offering today, and it is called Hurricanes, How They Form and Function. I'm meteorologist Serena Arnold, and I live here in New Hampshire. And one of the things that really drives me and is my passion is describing the weather to anybody. Doesn't matter how technical you are and what your background is. I truly try to explain the weather in ways that almost anybody can understand it. So if you're just curious about the weather, if you're an avid weather hobbyist and know all the terms and know as much as there is or anywhere in between. It's a class you're going to have a good time in. So for those that are watching this who have taken my courses before, you know we have a good time. We have some fun. We don't take things too terribly seriously, but we have some fun with it. The really fun thing about this hurricane course too is we're actually doing it on the start of hurricane season on June 1st. So it's going to be basically like a big hurricane party. So come join me. Let's come learn about hurricanes, where they form and how they form, and how they sustain themselves, and what happens when they make landfall and where they go. Let's come and talk about that, and bring your questions too. I want to hear what people have to say and what they want to know. Being here in New Hampshire, it's important that we are knowledgeable about this sort of things, not crazy like Florida, where we're going to be worried about a Cat 5. But let's talk about that. Why is that? Why do we not have to worry about Cat 5 hurricanes here in New Hampshire? So these are all the things you'll get to learn if you come to my hurricane class. I hope I see you there, and look forward to talking to everyone about hurricanes. Have a great day.